Welcome back to Star Wars Episode 1, The Plinkett Menace Part 2. If you haven't seen the first episode of this series, you might want to check that out first. If you've seen the first one, let's continue. Picking up where we left off, Qui-Gon is being toured through Watto's junkyard, and if you look towards the entrance arch on the right, you will see a shuttle pod from the movie 2001 laying with the wreckage. We have covered Watto's sales tactics, but one thing not covered is Qui-Gon trying to make Watto take Republic credits. Many claim this shows Qui-Gon's dubious and questionable nature, which I will argue, but I'm going to wait to address this until the Chance Cube scene that's coming up. Now we come to another Darth Jar Jar moment. When Sebulba is about to punch Jar Jar, the Gungan waves his hand in a very Jedi fashion in front of the pod racer. Sebulba suddenly slows his movement and glances at Anakin. It can be argued that this is circumstantial because Sebulba could have stopped to pay attention to Anakin. Take a long look again in slow motion. I have to say, how Jar Jar moves his hand is a little suspicious. Another thing to note is that there is a Jedi in this marketplace. His name is Quinlan Vos, and he can be seen sitting here. He will be mentioned in Episode 3 as well in this clip.
Seleucamai has fallen, and Master Vos has moved his troops to Bos Pitti.
Vos would go on to appear in a number of alternate media like a Clone Wars episode, books, and especially the Dark Horse comics. George Lucas was a fan of this character, and it is explained that Vos was an undercover Jedi of sorts, so it is stated that Jin might not have noticed him or purposefully ignored him. Regardless, the movie tells us none of this, so it's just a fun little Easter egg to throw on the side. I know a lot of people were upset that Anakin made C-3PO, but I never quite shared the sentiment. I know that does not respond to the complaints, but I have to be honest about my approach to this topic. To be honest, I like the idea that Anakin made 3PO because if you look at Empire Strikes Back, there is absolutely no reason why Chewbacca would have the parts of 3PO in his cell. I concluded that Darth had a little bit of a nostalgia for the droid and ordered it to be put in the cell to be repaired. It basically plugged that hole for that scene. I can understand why folks think it's too convenient, though, and don't dismiss their views on this matter. Now, I know my views are pure conjecture on this specific matter, but I have to note I was real pleased when there was a comic book made on this matter specifically. That confirmed my assumptions. Since I don't see comics as canon, I kind of dismiss this. In the end, I just wanted to mention this for your consideration. Another point made by Plinkett is, why is Anakin making a protocol droid for his mother? He can barely move his arms. Well, it makes sense that Anakin would make a protocol droid because Watto has these parts in his shop. Also, in the novel, it's stated that Anakin, or his mother, was often sent to Jawas to trade for Watto, and a protocol droid would help with translations. The book also said that Watto would have no problem taking the droid or the racer because anything he can profit on he will take. That is why Anakin kept C-3PO and the racer a secret from Watto. A question I have only heard a few times about this movie is how did Darth Maul track the Jedi to Tatooine? And the answer is not definitive, so many think it's a plot hole. I always thought that the moment anyone looked at the video sent from Naboo, it was traced. Responding to it is irrelevant. The bait was to listen to it, and therefore Maul tracked it that way. This is my theory, though, and I found nothing definitive to back it up, so take it as you will. Then we come to another complaint about the living conditions of Anakin and his mother. It is believed by some that the Skywalkers have it made for slaves. They have a home, food, C-3PO, a pod racer, and everything they need. For slaves, they sure do live well, and it really is not believable. The place where Shmi and Anakin live are slave quarters, and many slaves have apartments like this. I certainly don't believe that every slave owner in the galaxy is as cruel as Jabba, so I didn't have a problem with the depiction of their life. It's time for yet another Darth Jar Jar moment. When Qui-Gon goes to Watto's shop to get Anakin to enter the race, Padme argues with him. Notice Jar Jar in the background. Once again, he mimics her speech perfectly. Now, I don't think Padme is weak-minded, so I don't entertain that Jar Jar was using the Force to make her speak a certain way. This is just another moment where the animators are doing very suspicious things with this character, and at this point in the film, they have really added up. Now we come to the part where I personally never latched onto. The idea that Anakin was an immaculate conception was a bit strange to me, and perhaps this is so because the George Lucas Star Wars saga is as yet unfinished. Clearly he had ideas for episodes 7 through 9, and he did do preliminary work on these films. He even talked with Harrison, Carey, and Mark about the sequel trilogy in 2012 before he sold Lucasfilm. As most know, Lucas's ideas were thrown out by Kathleen Kennedy, J.J. Abrams, and Bob Iger. What we do know about George's vision was that it had something to do with the continuation of the Skywalker family for the new generation. The villain was going to be Darth Talon. We know this because Ian McCraig, who did the concept art for Lucas in early drafts, spoke about her design. We also know that a key part of episodes 7 through 9 was going to be about the Whills, and a lot of it focused on the concepts of midi-chlorians. Lucas stated he built the groundwork for these final 3 films in episode 1. The film would have been heavily ethereal in concept, and I can't say that I'm overly excited about that. However, I'm not opposed to it either. I have an open enough mind that I can accept the concept of midi-chlorians and the conception of Anakin. The problem is, I just don't understand it. And that is because we never finished George's entire vision. I grew up with the classic trilogy. The Force was magical to me, not based on your blood type. I realize everyone has the Force, but based on the blood, some can access the Force and some can't, so it kind of limited the Force in my eyes. The idea of the Whills being in control of the galaxy and that Force users are like cars is just a difficult concept for me to take in. But enough of my gripes, let's continue. During the night, Qui-Gon confirms Anakin's midi-chlorian count, and some complain that Qui-Gon had no permission to take blood from Anakin. I don't know if HIPAA policies translate to a galaxy far, far away, and I also don't know if Qui-Gon asked Shmi or not, because if you notice, it's now nighttime, and the last cut was in the day. Let's assume that it is possible he could have asked her, especially since she was standing in the doorway when Qui-Gon was talking to Obi-Wan, and she didn't throw a fit. Another deleted scene in the film was dawn on Tatooine. Anakin had worked all night and fell asleep to be wakened by Padme. Like many other deleted scenes, it's easy to see why it was cut from the final film. So now we come to the scene where Qui-Gon bets for Anakin's freedom and manipulates the dice outcome. A ton of critics of Episode 1 denote the hypothesis that Qui-Gon is immoral, and since it's a common argument, I think we should hear it from Plinkett himself.
Let's break down Qui-Gon, all the way to his midichlorians. Number 1, he has very questionable moral values. Qui-Gon Jinn repeatedly uses his Jedi mind trick to his advantage, whether it's to get Boss Nass to give him a bongo, which they completely trash, to use worthless money to scam Watto out of his ship parts,
credits will do fine,
or to fix a legitimate bet to his advantage. It's generally wrong to do these things, wouldn't you say? You can argue that the ends justify the means, but if that's the case, then why didn't Qui-Gon just steal the part from Watto? He could sneak in the middle of the night and just take the part. Or take it by force. And I don't mean that kind of force. I mean choke Watto while Padme grabs the part and they run out of the shop. Basically, it's the same as trying to trick him into accepting a worthless currency for the part. In the end, Watto's just out of the part.
Let's break this down. Is a bongo worth lives possibly being lost at Theed? This is applicable to the Republic credits with Watto. More so, is manipulation of a dice worth freeing a little boy from captivity after a mother asked you to help him? The argument is, the ends do justify the means. Now, going to the opposite extreme by saying Qui-Gon should take the part by force is just nonsense. If Qui-Gon resorted to force, he would be a Sith, not a Jedi, and this is obvious. There are limits to what a Jedi can do. It's clear Watto is not the negotiating type, so why would Qui-Gon bother to pointlessly argue and waste time? Besides, his group just escaped from Naboo, where people are being rounded up. Remember, their goal is to urgently reach the Republic to address the situation before it gets worse. Qui-Gon is in an extreme situation, and he is trying to roll with the punches. Nitpicking his morality by ignoring what the larger picture is brings into question your own morality. Don't you think, Mr. Plinkett?
And maybe I just don't see it because I'm a psychopath who butchers women. Well, yeah.
I love you, Plinkett, and although I'm arguing your points, I've watched your entertaining videos multiple times. Now we come to the 15-minute pod race, and there is also a ton of deleted scenes in here. For the most part, there is a grid sequence, which is shown here depicting more introductions to the pod racers and their vehicles. This is great for fans who want details like me, but honestly, it is unnecessary. Another deleted scene nuggets is seeing Rats Tyrell again. Remember when they entered Mos Espa and you saw the Blue family? Well, here he is about to do the pod race, and now you can see his family watching him. Just store them in the back of your mind for later. After Sebulba sabotages Anakin's pod racer, it's time for one of the most profound scenes in the prequel trilogy, in my opinion.
Remember, concentrate on the moment. Feel, don't think. Use your instincts.
I will.
May the Force be with you.
Remember, this is literally the first lesson Anakin ever received from a Jedi. Anakin followed this, and he won the race, won his freedom, and begun a path to become a Jedi. This would have been a defining moment in Anakin's life, and it would be connected to the idea of following instinct and letting the moment define your actions rather than thinking about it. I argue that for the rest of the trilogy, after Qui-Gon's death, the Jedi would constantly be active in beating this first lesson out of Anakin's mind because their way is not Qui-Gon's way. Instinct and feelings are not the current methodology used by the Council, and Anakin following this path would contradict their ways. When we get to the next movies, I have countless examples to show you of this, including Obi-Wan's condescending nature towards Anakin to the Council's stoic treatment towards the Padawan. Here are just 3 examples within the first 15 minutes of Attack of the Clones. This is just the tip of the iceberg and doesn't even cover all of the instances at the beginning of this movie.
I can sense everything going on in that room. Trust me.
It's too risky. Besides, your senses aren't that attuned to my young apprentice.
I think he's a good man. I sense it too.
This is a shortcut, I think. Well, you've lost him.
I'm deeply sorry, Master.
That was some shortcut, Anakin. He went completely the other way. Once again, you've proved...
If you'll excuse me, she went into the club, Master.
Patience. Use the Force. Think.
Sorry, Master.
We then get to see Qui-Gon teasing the Queen again when she tries to challenge him. At this point, it's pretty clear Qui-Gon knows who she is and is patronizing her. After the race starts and Anakin stalls, there is a short clip with Warwick Davis as Weasel. During the Kathleen Kennedy era of Star Wars, Weasel's character would be expanded upon as he appeared in Solo, a Star Wars story. Weasel became a freedom fighter who was second in command of the Cloud Riders under Enfys Nest. During the first lap of the pod race, we discover the fate of Rats Tyrell, the little blue alien that I noted in the deleted and Arrival at Mos Espa scenes. Alas, poor Rats is no more, as he is flat as a pancake. His story is not yet finished, so keep him in the back of your mind. For those that don't know the translation, when Odie Mandrell makes a pit stop, he immediately notices a droid haphazardly by his intake. He barks at his pit crew to get that droid away from the front of the engine. When they tell the droid, it thinks they want the tool and stupidly walks forward, thus damaging the pod beyond repair. In earlier extended scenes, they set up that these droids are analogous to the Three Stooges. One deleted scene that I thought should be in the film is when Sebulba shows his true nefarious ways by using a weapon on Klieg Holdfast's pod. Afterwards, salvage droids show us how they clean up wreckage. This scene creates more tension racing against Sebulba with some extra world building on the side. I would have much rather had this scene than the one where Anakin is spinning as his steel-ton control cable disconnects from his pod. I found it hard to believe that the pod would remain stable in this condition, especially after earlier scenes showed us what happens when the cables break on other pods. The scene where Anakin's engine catches fire actually makes logical sense. To cut off the fire, Anakin stops the flow of oxygen. Then he reroutes energy from the other engine to compensate. This is just one example of how insanely detailed this movie is. Practically everything has a reason for being there, and I really appreciate the depth of the world building that was put into this movie. Another deleted scene takes place in the third lap of the pod race. Tuskens are sniping at Jawas trying to take parts from Teemto Pageli's pod racer. The Tuskens show that their accuracy is not that great, which ties into Obi-Wan's comment to Luke in A New Hope. This scene is immediately followed up by a scene where Sebulba flashes his air vents at Anakin, which Anakin mentioned earlier as to the reason why he lost a previous race to Sebulba. For those who see Qui-Gon as just a stoic character, here are two cuts near the end of lap 3 of the pod race. Qui-Gon clearly shows concern and even looks away as he most likely wonders if he made the right choice. To round out the Rats Tyrell story, pay attention to the background as Qui-Gon and Watto discuss Anakin's freedom. You will see Tyrell's family walking past. One of them is weeping. With the pod race won and the parts obtained, Qui-Gon returns to the ship only to face off with Obi-Wan over Anakin.
Why do I sense we've picked up another pathetic life form?
It's the boy who's responsible for getting us these parts.
I have mixed feelings on the next deleted scene. It entails Anakin fighting a young Rodian who accused him of cheating. This Rodian is no other than Greedo from A New Hope. Qui-Gon intervenes and teaches Anakin another lesson, and it really is a workable scene. I just felt like we didn't need a member berry of A New Hope here. It shows that Lucas did not make his films based off of nostalgia. I want to take a moment to note Shmi Skywalker. I believe that had Qui-Gon lived, she would be off the planet shortly after the Naboo situation was resolved. Qui-Gon has showed us multiple times in this movie that his compassion for others is evident. In fact, I could never understand why the Jedi did not free Shmi after the fact. Since there are two sides to every story, I don't mind playing devil's advocate, though. The fact of the matter is that the only people who know about Shmi's existence is Anakin, Padme, and Jar Jar. After the Naboo situation is resolved, it is just Anakin around the Jedi, so it is reasonable to assume the Jedi had no thought of her beyond the fact that the boy misses a mother. Whether she is a slave or not, how would they know? For our last deleted scene on Tatooine, Anakin gives some money to Jira as they leave. This compounds Anakin's generous and kind nature at this stage in his life, a fact that Jira states in this scene. Then Qui-Gon and Anakin are followed by a probe droid before the Jedi cuts it in half with his lightsaber. I think this should have been left in the movie, as it explains how Maul found them and establishes why they are running to Anakin's exhaustion in the original cut. After escaping Maul and the meeting of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin, Padme watches a hologram of Sio Bibble pleading for help. Bibble would return in Episode 2, so he is not appeasing the Neimoidians. In fact, the scene before this one had Newt Gunray saying he would most likely kill Bibble. As a result, I would say this is pretty strong proof that Bibble is telling the truth about people dying on Naboo. This is why I am so adamant that Qui-Gon's actions were justified throughout the movie so far. And, as Mr. Spock says,
logic clearly dictates that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Or the one.
Another common complaint is that the movie becomes boring upon the arrival at Coruscant, as it's just politics. This is a subjective issue, and I cannot argue it. Up to this point, we have pretty much covered most of the arguments about the politics of this film, so everything here is pretty easy to understand as we go on. Also, we only spend about 17 minutes on this planet. However, I will admit that I have some bias here, as I'm a big Ian McDiarmid fan, so any frame with him in it, I'm hooked. Speaking of Palpatine, his plans have kind of been complicated now that Amidala is on Coruscant, so he pivots pretty hard. Instead of playing the victim of an occupied planet, he is going to try to make Amidala call out Valorum much faster than his original timeline. So her actually arriving will benefit him, and that is an important theme with Amidala's character. A lot of people who are not fans of this movie constantly say that Palpatine's plan makes no sense, and that had it not been for the Jedi or Padme interfering, it would never have worked. I think I've pointed out that such an argument is not accurate because whether they interfered or not, Palpatine would have gained something. Episode 1 sets up that Palpy consistently underestimated Amidala, and this will continue to happen until the day she dies. Ironically, Padme will become one of the senators who was involved with the formation of the rebellion. So you can say that she is a constant thorn in Palpatine's side. She is more a foil to Palpatine than the Jedi. I really wished they pushed her more in Revenge of the Sith, as there were many deleted scenes with her in that movie, but that is a subject for a later video. Now, I have covered my belief that the Jedi are stale and apathetic earlier, so I don't feel the need to go into that further until we get to Attack of the Clones. What I do want to note is that when watching this scene, it is very important to see the way the Jedi treat Qui-Gon. Yoda argues the semantics of Qui-Gon's wording in a petty fashion. Jin, not wanting to argue or mince words, cuts to the point of the discussion. By the end of the short conversation, Ki-Adi-Mundi looks annoyed, while Mace actually patronizes Qui-Gon when he relents to screening an applicant. Such screening should be a standard practice for them with any candidate, so why is there an issue? They treat Jin with contempt, much like a manipulative person would do when trying to make an adversary look stupid. Obi-Wan would later echo the Council's sentiments by trying to berate him on the balcony of the Jedi Temple. Clearly, he shares their philosophies. One of the logical arguments against this movie that I agree with is why didn't Amidala show evidence for the invasion of Naboo? Such evidence could help avoid time being wasted on a stupid commission being appointed. Amidala does have damage caused by blaster fire on her ship, and she has the hologram of Sio Bibble stating the situation on the planet. You could argue that the Queen could be hoaxing the whole thing and ordering her top aide to make the holo video if you were a senator loyal to the Federation, but it certainly would help Amidala's argument in the long run if she used this material. One thing that many cite is that Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan should have addressed the Senate to speak about the Naboo situation for further evidence. this might have happened off-screen between a cut, so we can't say definitively if this did or did not happen. Also, we have to remember that Valorum sent the Jedi to Naboo in secret without the permission of the Senate. Most likely, he was hoping the Jedi would have solved the issue. However, they did not. If the Jedi did report to the Senate, it may cause Valorum to look like he overstepped his authority by sending the Jedi without approval, and I'm sure this would destabilize him further. For this reason, I could understand why Valorum would avoid calling the Jedi to testify, if possible to save his own skin. However, this is all conjecture. As for Amidala calling for a vote against Valorum, it all follows. Palpatine was not only egging her on, but there really was no other option, and I think she did this out of hopelessness rather than agitation. She would later go on to say this:
"It is clear to me now that the Republic no longer functions. I pray you will bring sanity and compassion back to the Senate."
It seems evident she came to this conclusion when she called the vote and just gave up on a political solution. This concretes the view that the politics of the galaxy are a disaster. This leads us to yet another argument, where it's been said that the government is too stupid to believe such a system would never exist, and how could a civilization support it? To that I can only answer, I am sure many citizens around the world feel the same about their own governments. This would be no different. The last Senate coverage I have is a deleted scene that showed Bail Organa backing Amidala's vote of no confidence. I'm actually glad this didn't make it into the film, as I think it was more effective to introduce Bail as Jimmy Smits in the second film. By this point in the movie, there is just so much packed into it. Whether it's ETs hiding in the Senate to the proposed USS Enterprise flying by in a shot, not everything needs to be crammed into the first movie. Darth Jar Jar theorists say that Jar Jar is once again manipulating Amidala in this scene. Yet again, I attest that Amidala, including the Jedi, are not weak-minded, so the assumption that Jar Jar would use mind tricks on them makes no sense. It is here that Amidala reveals her plan to return home. When she tells Palpatine she is returning to Naboo, I believe he genuinely didn't want her to return because of her unpredictability. In the end, he will get his chancellorship, but whatever he had planned to gain with the Trade Federation involving Naboo will fail, and it will fail because of Amidala. The final Jedi Council scene is really instrumental for the entire prequel trilogy. This moment is the stage for the creation of Darth Vader. Anakin is flat out rejected by the Council, and Mace's delivery is as cold as ice. Jake Lloyd really lands his performance here as he shows his contempt for the decision. Instead of a healthy initiate, Anakin will now forever be a rejected initiate, out to prove his worthiness to a council that will never accept him. He will be treated with skepticism and caution. When he is not treated like that, he will be belittled or diminished. Without acceptance, Anakin will turn to Palpatine, who offers that acceptance and encouragement. It is the Jedi and their lack of empathy that are the germ for Darth Vader, not Palpatine, and I intend to give receipts for this as the film shows these things. I will cover it all when I do the episode 2 and 3 essays, so be ready for it. As we close out the Jedi Council scene, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan have another conflict. Barely a moment has passed with the two of them not conflicting. Jin makes it clear Obi-Wan can't learn much from him, and I would argue it's because of Obi-Wan's indoctrination. Instead of resolving the issue, it is put on hold, and Jin is given the responsibility of drawing out a Sith and protecting the Queen while the Council and their many Jedi sit on Coruscant awaiting the development, even though Mace said this:
"We will use all our resources to unravel this mystery. We will discover the identity of your attacker."
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
After Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's final argument, every fan's favorite topic of midi-chlorians come up, and this is an unwinnable argument. As I said before, I'm pretty neutral towards the idea since we never saw George's final vision. I am, after all, one of those fans who wished Lucas never sold Star Wars to Disney, as I never shared the sentiment that he ruined Star Wars. I can understand why some see it that way, though, especially when the topic of midichlorians and the special editions come up. Upon the return to Naboo, a common complaint is why is there only one Trade Federation starship orbiting instead of the number that was there in the beginning? I've heard defenses of this argument by saying we can't see all the ships because they are on the other side of the planet. But I dismiss that because during the battle we only see one control ship. When that ship is destroyed, all the droids shut down. If there were other starships, the droids would most likely continue functioning. It's pretty convenient there is only one ship now so our heroes can sneak down to the surface and deal with only one starship. I could try to say they control the planet now and therefore they feel more secure to their claim. If the Republic did send ships, they would lose the situation no matter how many starships they had there. As cowardly as these Neimoidians are, you would think they would be paranoid and would overly compensate their defenses. Upon arriving, Qui-Gon shows yet again his stance towards manipulating others with this conversation.
The Gungans will not be easily swayed. And we cannot use our power to help her.
This is just another example that Qui-Gon will not use his power to harm others by suggestion. It was nice that Lucas put in a moment where Obi-Wan has some humility towards his master, thus repairing some of the rift in their relationship. During the meeting with Boss Nass, one of the dumbest arguments from critics shows itself. The argument is, why would Boss Nass have such a change of heart to help the Naboo with their lives? This is a brainless argument, because Nass and his people are being hunted and forced out of their homes. It's a much better chance joining forces than going it alone. Plus, Amidala's approach is respectful and helps to make the decision easier. Another Darth Jar Jar moment has the Gungan waving his hand at Boss Nass as he promotes him to general. On this point, I can take it either way. It's either a dismissive wave, or it's what the theorists claim. This does not help sell the theory to me, though. Wait, you brought a 9-year-old to a war zone? Why not keep him with the Gungan children and those remaining behind? I'm not going to challenge this complaint. I know why Anakin is here, but it would have been handled better if Anakin snuck along with them and then you could have placed him in the Starfighter. See, I agree with you sometimes, Mr. Plinkett.
Wait, why is there a child-sized helmet and goggles in the cockpit?
The next couple pictures are adults in their pilot helmets, so let's compare how the helmets fit on adults. I want you to note the jawbones. Notice the helmet hangs just under the ear at the corner of the jawbone. Also look at the bill of the helmet, which is just above the eye line. See how snug the helmet fits the foreheads of adults. Now look at Anakin's helmet. His helmet does not fit his forehead snugly, and it is way past the jawbone. So this helmet is not child-sized. Another attempt to counter this argument is to say that Jake Lloyd's head is big and just fits in an adult helmet. Take a look at Anakin and Rick Ollie beside each other. Anakin's head is not as big as Rick Ollie's, so that defense doesn't really hold up. Finally, take a look at Anakin putting on the helmet closely. Look at how much room this helmet has for his head. It actually wobbles for a bit, and you can see his right ear is not even touching the helmet. It is without a doubt too big for him. This is the point where we come to what Plinkett calls the ending multiplication effect, in which Plinkett states that there is too many issues being resolved at the same time, and as a result, it is less impactful as earlier Star Wars films. Is it really too much? I actually enjoyed how busy the ending was the first time I saw it. I felt that the entire film was crammed with so much that it was designed for repeat viewings, and I think it is very special when you can watch a movie over and over again and see new layers with each viewing. I cannot say that Plinkett is wrong, nor is he right. Our next Darth Jar Jar moment shows Jar Jar destroying multiple droids by stumbling and moving about with amazing luck. Theorists suggest that Jar Jar is so lucky that it only could be the Force. Now, the official goal of the battle scenes were based off of Buster Keaton movies, and as you can see, they are pretty loyal to recreating them. However, we also know that Jar Jar was modeled after Drunken Fist at times, so it's possible that these theorists are right. It's sounding repetitive, but once again, you will have to decide.
What is this room? Is this in the palace? I mean, I know George wanted the Jedis to fight in a cool place that's really Star Warsy. So what, this is like a power generator? What does it power, the universe? So you're expecting me to believe that the people that built this technological wonder were dying without space supplies for 2 days?
Firstly, we can't assume the Naboo were starving without space supplies. How do you know this? No one said they were starving until...
Your queen is lost. Your people are starving, and you, Governor, are going to die much sooner than your people, I'm afraid.
This was after the people were placed in camps. So we can deduce they are starving in captivity. Secondly, as I have already established, the blockade has not been 2 days, but close to 30 per the novel. So right off the bat, wrong assumptions are linked to this location to cast doubt on its plausibility. Now I'm going to tell you exactly what this room is, and then I ask you to be patient as I go off in a tangent. This room is the Theed Generator Complex. It basically sucks plasma from the planet and converts it into energy. This plasma fuels their ships, which is why it is next to the hangar, and it also powers all of Theed, which is a pretty big city. It also stores reserve power, and at times this is traded for currencies. Since I know this argument is coming, let's cover this corridor with the laser gates. What is happening here is excess energy is being transferred to prevent danger of overheating or overloading. After the excess energy has been transferred, it reverts back to normal. Beyond this corridor with the laser gates is a long shaft that leads to the main reactor core, so it's not looking good for Darth Maul's survival down here, Mr. Filoni. Everything makes complete sense in this environment, if you care to find out why. Now, a long time ago, in 1975, a fan of Star Trek wrote a book called The Starfleet Technical Manual with the blessing of Gene Roddenberry. This book was an instant success and was on the New York Times bestseller list for some time. Fans loved this book in the 70s as it expanded Star Trek by making it more grounded and into a bigger universe. The book was respected by the film crews, and as new stuff would come out, the technical manuals would evolve with the media. The writers might have been different, but it was always linked to the productions, and many times production staff were credited by the book. Star Wars did this as well, and for over 30 years these technical manuals were considered canon while being loved and debated by fans. Even today, these technical manuals are made, but according to most reviewers, the film is the only thing that counts, and we should ignore any external information because it is taboo. Let me give you an example of this book and this book, released on December 15th, 2017. This was the exact date the film was released, so it should be respected as a movie reference book and not dismissed as EU canon. Now I want you to look at this Resistance bomber. This bomber was designed to drop heavy payloads of over 1,000 proton bombs on a single target. The bombs were magnetic, and a magazine in the ship propelled these bombs towards a target until their magnets came on. The bomber crews were supposed to stay in a tight formation and use their gun turrets to lay down fire like a blanket to protect the vulnerable ships from enemy attacks. Meanwhile, escort fighters were supposed to ensure enemy craft did not molest these crafts. It was identical to World War II bombing strategies, and this is confirmed by Rian Johnson, who hearkened back to this for the scenes the ships appear in. They are noted to be very slow, but they did have a single hyperdrive engine, so when they dropped their payload, they could make a quick jump to escape. Now, knowing all this, I want you to look at the way these bombers were handled in the movie The Last Jedi. Notice the fighters are not ahead of the bombers to meet the TIE fighters that are incoming. Also, when the bombers appeared, they appeared out of nowhere, and they were never detected by the First Order until they are right on top of the Dreadnought. There is such a small group of fighters around these ships that they offer little protection, and therefore these bombers are turned into mincemeat immediately, and they seem stupid in design because they are all like paper. The film does not tell us the Resistance is short on craft or fighter pilots to protect these bombers. When the bombs drop, you can see the ship is engulfed in the explosion, so the audience thinks this is a kamikaze craft. In the end, the execution of this technology is made incompetent by the film's direction, not the concept. When you are in the Theed generator complex, you need to ask yourself, is it done incompetently? It is just there. And if this was any other sci-fi show or movie with a fantastic setting, it would be all fine. All this is a critic wanting to say,
it makes no logical sense. Why is it here? This episode was badly written.
What a great movie. I'm serious. Go watch Galaxy Quest right now if you have any love for Star Trek whatsoever. What else do you have for us, Mr. Plinkett?
So we're back to the three guys we know nothing about fighting each other in a scene we have no interest in. Their flawless choreography lacks all humanity and emotion. But then something happens. Qui-Gon dies, and Obi-Wan is pissed. Hey, maybe this'll finally get good. Maybe I'll get emotionally involved. You see, Obi-Wan is pumped. He really wants to kick this guy's ass. And then, bam! Oh, it's right back to highly choreographed fighting. It's like all this was planned out ahead of time.
I see a flurry of emotions and humanity seeping through the cracks of Obi-Wan's composure. Are you telling me that Darth Maul is emotionless? Maul is an assassin Sith who is seething with rage and desire to hurt the Jedi. Every movement he makes in this fight is analogous to a rabid animal. He even looks like a caged animal here. I can feel his intensity a mile away. Now, Qui-Gon is calm, and as an Elder Jedi, he should be that, if you remember what the classic films taught us. In fact, I think it's perfect he meditates here, as Maul is taunting him. As far as the choreography goes, this argument has not aged well, because after 11 movies, many cite Episode 1 as their favorite lightsaber duel. In fact, even folks who don't like this movie commonly note this duel as one of the best in Star Wars. You may say it is all choreography. I say this is how a duel should look from beings who can see things before they happen. Boy, wouldn't it be great if the Jedi had some kind of force healing available here? Especially for a lightsaber to the chest. I mean, that's got to be lethal. There's no way to survive from that. This deleted scene has Amidala winning the battle and addressing Nute Gunray. It's a nice scene, but not really necessary, as it is covered when the Republic ship lands later. This is my favorite deleted scene of the film. When Anakin lands, the pilots look to congratulate the seasoned fellow who saved the battle, only to find an apologetic boy asking if he will get into trouble. This should have been in the film. When the Republic cruiser lands, all the Jedi Council disembark without Mace Windu. However, there is one Jedi out of place. This guy. Surely they didn't think he would pass for Mace, right? Did they make a mistake here? Anyways, Plinkett has another argument, and then we're going to wrap up the film.
Then Yoda and Obi-Wan are talking in the castle, and Yoda says,
"Grave danger I fear in his training."
I gave Qui-Gon my word.
"Oh, you gave Qui-Gon your word. I suppose it's better to rely on that than rather the whole prediction of grave danger. So it seems like the Jedi Council reluctantly agrees to let Obi-Wan train the boy for no real reason. Hey, remember, this is not like some kind of boardroom of company executives making a decision about applesauce packaging. These are Jedi Masters whose entire existence is solely based on the Force, feelings, premonition, and prophecy. When they all feel weirded out and predict grave danger, you'd think they of all people would follow their own instincts. But instead, for no reason at all, they allow the training.
Agree with you, the Council does. Your apprentice, Skywalker, will be.
Hey, maybe you should have just said no.
Once again, Plinkett misses a lot of details with this issue. The Council begrudgingly trains Anakin because there are many things at stake. First of all, he has more midichlorians than any life form alive, and that is an unknown. It's much better to try to control or mold this being rather than let it function outside their sphere to become who knows what. What is even worse is now there is a confirmed Sith roaming around the universe. Wouldn't it be terrible if this Sith found this monumentally significant being? There is also the consideration that this boy could potentially be the prophecy that they spoke of earlier in this movie. And if they ignore that potential, would it bite them in the behind in the future? Finally, they sense grave danger in training this boy. What does that mean? How do they interpret that? Does that mean people will die because of him? Will he die because of training? What if the grave danger means Anakin's inclusion in the Clone Wars rather than his training? Do you really think these premonitions are a dead-on science? Don't you remember when Yoda said, "Always in motion is the future"? I'm sure they would be very cautious to watch over this boy and Obi-Wan's training of him. Do you really think it's logical to let this powerful child to be on the loose in the galaxy? Use common sense here. Now, there are a lot of things I didn't mention in this video, as the movie has so much to offer in repeat viewings. I didn't mention the Gungans fist-fighting battle droids during the Battle of Naboo, Indiana Jones in the pod racer arena, or the amazing soundtrack. And I'm not talking just Duel of the Fates. I mean the entire extended soundtrack. It's one of John Williams' best scores ever. However, that just shows the depth and brilliance and effort put into The Phantom Menace. I do call the movie brilliant. Before we close out the video, there's one more issue to resolve.
So who dropped the ball? Well, I guess you could say it was everyone involved in the production. Mainly the producers and those higher up on the food chain. Sure, it's easy to blame George for the script and doing everything wrong, but those people who didn't challenge Lucas on some of the questionable ideas, they also carry some blame. To quote Gary Kurtz, you can really see this in the behind-the-scenes videos. People look scared around George. They laugh at his bad jokes.
You're listening to the music.
When he comes into a room, there's like silence and fear and terror. Every so often, you'll catch some looks of confusion and mistrust. You gotta wonder what some of these people were thinking. Now again, I must stress, I wasn't there and I can't pretend to know all the goings-on behind the scenes, but it all seems pretty obvious if you think about it.
Yes, you were not there. You also neglect to show scenes in the documentary where people tell George how they're going to do things like Frank Oz, or how John Knoll is given ownership to manage projects and direct FX shots without George present. To do so goes against your entire narrative. That's just not very fair. Plinkett likens this movie to a complete failure in every way, and at this point he goes after the people who made it. After suggesting crew around George had fear and terror, he states that Lucas's total control is what wrecked this movie. I hate to break this to you, but Lucas had total control since Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi as well. It was his money paying for both those movies. You narrate this as if Episode 1 was the first movie he had total control of, and that's what ruined it. You could argue that Marshall Lucas and Gary Kurtz really influenced Lucas, and this affected the end result. Before 1980, Lucas allowed many to influence his ideas, whether it was music, sound, acting, and concepts. It is well documented, and you could make an entire video arguing this point. George was also giving and supportive of the fan base, even after it turned on him in 1999. To pretend that this aura of authority changed from the classic films to the prequel films is an outright lie. Throughout Plinkett's entire video, it is based on faulty assumptions about the film and the making of it. And that is why it's easily debunked. Which brings us to the point of this video. The worst line I ever heard from a YouTuber was,
"Now, I know it seems impossible to watch movies wrong, but you're watching movies wrong."
Audience, you are watching movies right, and your views of movies will evolve just as your life changes. You grow with the medium. Any film can be great or bad through subjectivity. Two terrible films that are wonderful to me is The Room, and the other is Battle Beyond the Stars. The Room is just laughably acted, and I love it because it's so bad.
I did not hit her. It's not true. It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark.
Oh, hey, Johnny, what's up?
I have a problem with Lisa. She said that I hit her.
What? Well, did you?
No, it's not true. Don't even ask. What's new with you?
When I watch Battle Beyond the Stars, it is a B movie for my child self who thirsted for another Star Wars movie in 1980. It made that kid happy. I am reminded of that kid every time I see it. No one can argue that, but despite this, I must have self-awareness to acknowledge that they are not great movies to others. Films we love can be objectively bad, and films we hate can be objectively good. It all comes down to understanding that our views can be fallible, and therefore a conversation should be welcome and tolerated to all sides. I think that's what made Siskel and Ebert so great. Sometimes they disagreed vehemently, but they always came back to talk about it next week. They did that because they love talking about movies. Movies are supposed to bring us together as fans and critics. We should love talking about them rather than hating those who disagree with us. Films are an escape, nothing more, not weapons to be used between opposing viewpoints. The Plinkett Review was turned into a weapon against George Lucas and fans who like this movie. I don't think this is what Red Letter Media intended. I think they were just trying to entertain. Despite this, the video was picked up by so many and used as a weapon. I guess this video is no different because I hold the movie up to repel that review. Prequel fans have been badgered by prequel hate for years. I just wanted to stand up to those who use Plinkett's material as a mascot to justify their disdain, whether toward the movie or those who like it. People speak as if prequels are bad as a fact. They need better arguments to quantify that hypothesis. Anyways, we just thought it was time to represent this. We'll see you in our next video. If you like what you saw here, click like and subscribe.